This is a PowerPoint presentation for Chapter 10 of Sociology 3392, Qualitative Field Research. So for your final project, you're going to have to decide whether you want to do a qualitative or quantitative project. Generally, most students tend to pick the qualitative project. They're, a little bit maybe nervous of picking something that they're going to have to do some statistical analyses for, especially if they haven't taken 3391 yet. Of course, you can pick either or. The qualitative one tends to be, I would say, take a little bit longer, be a little bit more work because you have to find those participants before you do your analysis, collect your data, do your analysis. So it might take a little bit longer than the quantitative project, but of course you can definitely choose this if you want to do it. So this chapter, we're just going to go over some of the topics appropriate for field research and the different types of qualitative research that you might choose to do. So these are topics that defy simple quantification. So, sometimes attitudes and behaviors are best understood in their natural setting. By giving somebody a survey that asks them yes or no, this or that, how many times they've done something, you don't really get the full understanding or the full picture of something. Social processes over time. This is another, good topic appropriate for field research. So practices, episodes, encounters, roles and social types, social and personal relationships. Again, it's up to you whether you pick a qualitative or quantitative project, but sometimes the qualitative stuff gets a little bit deeper at what maybe you're looking at. It's really good for exploratory topics if you don't know a lot about something. Okay, so some of the topics that we use: groups and cliques, organizations, settlements and habitats, social worlds, subcultures and lifestyle. So next we're going to talk about the roles of the researcher. So it's really important that you sort of define what role you're going to take before you start your qualitative research. So the first role is the complete researcher. So in this role, you're only presenting yourself as a participant and not a researcher. So you are not letting your subjects know that you're doing a research project. We talked a little bit about Laud Humphreys when we talked about research ethics. This would be a role of the complete researcher. And the downside to this is that it does use deception. So you might have difficulty if you're, doing something for the IRB to get that IRB's approval, because as we know, using deception, you're kind of walking a fine line here. Yes, you can find out a lot of really cool stuff that you might not be able to find out if you were, letting your subjects know that you're a researcher, but at the same time, you're kind of lying to your subjects. The good thing about this is that you're going to get valid and reliable data. You will be able to, get the true thoughts and feelings and behaviors of your subjects because you're not telling them that you're researching them. Subjects are going to change. If they know you're a researcher, they're going to act differently, especially in, sensitive subjects, sensitive topics. So you're going to get better data if you're doing this. Okay, the next role is participant researcher. So the researcher participates in research, but also identifies themselves as a researcher. So a really good example of this is Alice Goffman's ethnography on crime in a Philly neighborhood. So this, she identified herself as a researcher, but really participated with her subjects as well. So she, this is kind of seen as being an unethical study as well, because she got so involved with this research study that she allowed herself to do things that basically were illegal. So she, saw crimes being committed, didn't report them. So again, it gets kind of fuzzy. If you're a participant researcher, you have to, remember that you are a researcher first and don't get too caught up in your study. Reactivity, this is when the participants, act differently because they know they're being studied. You might not get the best, most valid data if, you're taking on the role of the researcher. One criticism of Alice Goffman's study is that she went native. So again, she really got too far into this. She allowed herself to, I think she knew of a murder going on or something. I don't really remember what went down. But she went native, meaning that she kind of abandoned her role as a researcher and really took on this role of a participant in the study. Okay, so the next role of the observer is the complete observer. So you're not interacting with your participants at all. You're simply sort of watching them and observing them, recording their observations from afar. So they may or may not know that they're being studied. So again, you're less likely to go native again because you're not interacting with your subject at all. So there's not the issue of just getting so caught up in your study that you're kind of forgetting your role. But you really might not get the full picture of what's going on if you're not participating. So if we look back to Laud Humphrey's studies, he participated in there. He was, the watch queen for these individuals that were engaging in sexual behaviors in the bathrooms. So he, as participating, he got to really know what was going on that he might not have gotten with if he was simply maybe watching from afar. So you might not get the full picture of what's going on as a complete observer, but again, it's seen as maybe a little bit more ethical than the other ways. So we talked a little bit about Bandura in his Bobodal study to study aggression in children. The researchers here, the research team did not interact with the kids when they're playing with the dolls. Bandura wasn't in there telling him to hit the dolls or anything like that. So he's taking on this complete observer role. Okay, so several things to keep in mind when you're deciding on what role you're going to be taking. The relation to your subjects. Again, for research, you want to remain as objective as possible. So keep your scientific objectivity. It's really, difficult to do this if you're interacting with your participants at all, but you always want to remember to try to remain as objective as possible. Alien, a Martian, this is the degree of separation between the researcher and the participant. So again, you want to keep some sort of degree of separation, not what Alice Goffman did. You want to really, keep that role as a researcher, keep from going native. Reflexivity, this is acknowledging your role in your research. So your prior beliefs and experiences may influence your research. Just who you are, your prior experiences, even, your demographics is going to play a role on the researcher. For example, if you might be able to get a little bit more valid data from your participants if you really have those lived experiences that your participants might have. So if you are say you're interviewing people that, are homeless, if you come there dressed to the nines and, your expensive clothes, your high socioeconomic status don't really have any lived experience of being homeless or homelessness, you might get different data basically than if you had that lived experience and have lived that role before. So you really just want to acknowledge your role in that research and the degree of separation between you and your subjects. Okay, next we're going to talk a little bit about different types of qualitative research. First is naturalism. This is the assumption that objective reality exists and can be observed and reported accurately. So this is just basically recording what you're seeing, saying that objective social reality exists, observing what you're observing, writing it down. This is also, we call the Chicago School of Sociology. This is like more old school way of doing stuff. Still useful today. But we also have sort of different ways of looking at stuff. For example, ethnomethodology. This is an approach to the study of social life that focuses on the discovery of implicit, usually unspoken assumptions and agreements. So this is going a little bit further, digging in a little bit deeper, saying that we can't just look at things and record them. We really have to study the interactions that are taking place during this study. Phenomenology, this is making sense of participants' perspectives. Again, not just, looking at something, recording it, but we're really, getting a sense of the participants' perspectives and really digging a little bit deeper. Ethnography, these are, a common qualitative project in social research. This is a report on social life that focuses on detailed and accurate descriptions rather than explanations. So you're basically doing a very, very detailed description of social life rather than explaining, why it's happening. Okay, something that you might be using if you're doing your qualitative research study is grounded theory. So this is when theory is grounded in the data. So this is an inductive approach to data collection and analysis. You're not going into your study with an idea of what you're going to find or a theory in mind. You're really just looking at the data and letting the data know what's happening. So again, get your research question, figure out what you're going to do, start collecting your data, code your data, maybe going back and saying, I need a little bit more data, collecting more data, coding this data, on and on and on, comparing it as you're going along, and then, coming up with a grounded theory. So it's a kind of constant method of data collection, coding, and then deciding whether or not, maybe we need to collect some more data. A case study. So this is something that you're probably not going to do for your research project. This is a very in-depth look at an instance of a social phenomenon. And usually they use more than one research methodology. So a lot of times maybe they'll do a mixed method study, collect surveys from multiple different viewpoints, some observations, collecting data from a bunch of different places on one particular event. So usually this uses an ideographic method. If you think back to earlier, I think chapter 1 maybe, we talked about nomothetic and ideographic methods. This is when we would use an ideographic method. So looking very at depth into one particular event or case. So for example, the Enron case study, a very infamous white collar crime, they used a bunch of different data from a bunch of different sources and sort of put it all together to talk about this one particular event. An institutional ethnography. So this is a research technique in which the personal experiences of individuals are then used to reveal power relationships and other characteristics of the institution within which they operate. So again, it's not simply looking at a social phenomenon and writing things down. We're looking at these sort of interactions to reveal power relationships. So it was originally developed to understand women's experiences, but now we use it to sort of uncover all forms of oppression. This is a type of research that really links the micro and macro levels together. So we're sort of learning about people's on the micro level, their sort of lived experiences, and looking at this and applying it to the macro level and looking at maybe things like oppression and these sort of different sort of big societal views of stuff. Okay, so next is participatory action research. This is where the participants are really, really involved with the purposes and procedures of research. So they're really giving their opinions on, how data should be collected, what they need to collect. They're really involving themselves in the research project itself. So traditional research methods are sort of seen as elitist. Again, if you're looking at homelessness and you're simply, showing up to an area where, homeless people are maybe living dressed to the nines and writing things down in your notebook, that kind of seems elitist because it's not really doing anything to help these individuals. It's really, just kind of observing them not getting involved. So you might use emancipatory research. So this is where the research is conducted for the purpose of benefiting disadvantaged groups. So for example, maybe you're going to be researching, a homeless camp, but you're going to be going and interviewing people and really letting them know, okay, what needs to be done to help you guys? How do we help you, within the homeless camp? Focus group. So this is a group of subjects interviewed together. So basically having a big discussion. This is, sometimes used in social research. It's used a lot in market research. So for example, if you want to get opinions on, a vacuum cleaner, you might give a bunch of people a vacuum cleaner and then bring them all together and have a discussion about what they liked and what they didn't like about it. But, we can do social research using this as well. So it had some advantages. Real life data, you're collecting it as it's happening, really flexible. You can, steer the topic other directions. You can, make questions up on the fly and ask people questions about this. High degree of face validity because the people are right there, talking to you. It's fast. You don't have to interview people separately when you're doing, a big group interview. It tends to be less expensive as well. However, disadvantages might not be representative. You might, be only getting a small proportion of people that, have opinions on something when you want a greater variety of viewpoints. The interviewer can lose control very easily. There's always, in a group discussion, there's always a couple of people that really dominate the discussion, and you might not hear from people that, maybe are a little bit more shy. It's really difficult to do this analysis. Again, it tends to go off topic. It tends to get overtaken by one or two individuals. Difficult logistically because you have to get everybody on board into one location at one time. It's part of people's busy schedules. Maybe a little bit easier over Zoom, but still, it's better to do it in person. It's hard to get people, all together. You're not going to be doing this for the purposes of your research project for this class, but, I might ask questions on the exam about focus groups. Okay, so just a few tips on conducting qualitative field research. First, you want to prepare for the field. So you want to be familiar with what's already done and what you already need to do. Discuss your plans with others in the area. Maybe if you're, doing research in a homeless encampment, you want to let people know what you're doing before you start doing it, before you're walking around, with your notepad, writing notes. You want to identify and meet your informants when appropriate. So informants are somebody that's going to, get an in on the research. So maybe it's somebody that you have a prior relationship, in this homeless encampment that's going to give you access to other people to interview. First impressions are very important. Again, how people view you. If you're a lot different than them, they might be a little bit hesitant to give you valid data. Establishing your rapport, again, very, very important. You want to have an open and trusting relationship with the people that you are studying. Okay, so a qualitative interview. So this is, more of a conversation instead of, boxes that need to be checked. Contrasted with a survey interview, a qualitative interview is based on a set of topics to be discussed in depth without using standardized questions. So if you're doing a survey, you have a list of questions that you're going to be asking. You're going to be asking the same way. You're not going to be, adding in things at the last minute. But with a qualitative interview, it's more of a guided conversation. So you want to touch on a few different topics, but it's much more open-ended. So you want to, think about whether you're going to be a minor or a traveler. So a minor, are you digging in facts and feelings from your research participants or their expressions, or are you going to be a traveler? So you're journeying with your participants to discover insights. We also, have a gardener, planting seeds for interactions and cultivating rapport and relationships. All right, so the stages that you're going to be taking in your complete interviewing process. First is thematizing, just, deciding what topic you're going to pick. Designing, how are you going to complete your interviews? Where are you finding people from? Jotting down, a few questions or topics that you want to talk on. Interviewing, so the actual conversation that you're having with your subject. Transcribing, making a written copy of your conversation. So what you're going to be doing for the purposes of this project and what's usually done in qualitative research. If you have the permission from the subject to do this, you're going to be recording the interview and then making a written copy, transcribing it, and deleting the recording. Coding, this is going to be categorizing your data. So looking for, themes, topics in your data, analyzing those codes, determining the meaning of your data, and then verifying. So checking your validity and reliability. We're going to be going over this at length when we're talking about our qualitative data analysis. Finally, reporting. This is when you are writing down what you found in your study and showing it or submitting it to others. Okay, so just a few helpful tips about doing your qualitative field research. When you're recording your observation, you want to take detailed notes but balance with observations. So you want to write down sort of these quick notes when you're doing your actual interviews, and then going back right after your interviews and really rewriting those notes so things are fresh in your mind. You want to record your empirical observations and interpretations. Again, record everything and anticipate sort of the things that you think that you might find before you're looking at it. This is how to take the most detailed notes in field research. So strengths and weaknesses of field research. Well, strengths, it's really effective at studying the subtle nuances and attitudes and behaviors and social processes over time. Again, you're going to find you're able to dig really deep, whereas a survey research, you're probably not. It's really flexible. Again, you can kind of add in things at the last second. If you're you're doing a qualitative interview with somebody, you're having this conversation and they say something that maybe you haven't even thought about as a topic or a question, you can really, just ask additional questions about that topic. Whereas, survey research is very rigid. You can't just go in adding questions after you've already made your survey. Inexpensive, it's not going to take a lot of money unless you're, giving them a bonus for completing your interview, but generally it's a lot cheaper to do than survey research. It does have a lot of weaknesses. There's no appropriate statistical analyses. You can't develop causal relationships, but it might not be seen as a weakness because that's not the purpose of qualitative research. Validity. So you're going to have greater validity than survey and experimental measurements. Again, you're going to be able to get at those topics just a little bit further. You can see things that you can't see when you're just using statistics. However, it tends to be a lot less reliable. So potential problems with reliability are that different researchers are asking questions in different ways. If you have a survey and you're, giving a survey, two different researchers are giving a survey to somebody, it's probably not going to elicit very different answers because the questions are so standardized. But when you're having a conversation, you're going to get two completely different interviews depending on who is doing the interview. So you really have to keep that in mind when you're doing qualitative field research. Ethics in qualitative research. So planning and conducting responsible field research involves confronting ethical issues that arise from the researcher's direct contact with subjects. Again, there's a lot of ways that this can go very, very wrong and become unethical. Confidentiality, again, you're going to know who your subjects are if you're interviewing them, most likely. So you have to agree to keep their confidentiality. Doing no harm, again, you can get into trouble if you're, really digging really deep into somebody's, troubling experiences or, sources of trauma. You just really need to keep that in mind that you could end up harming the participant.